For the first time in years, I touched Tristan's phone. He usually carried it around with him at all times, even in the shower on the shelf. It was like he was afraid he'd miss an important call. But what calls at 4 in the morning? This time he'd left the phone on the bedside table. He'd forgotten it in his haste to go for a morning jog. 40 years of marriage and he still runs in the morning. Says it's the secret to his energy and longevity. I didn't mean to spy. I really wasn't. It was just that the phone vibrated, and I mechanically glanced at the screen. A message from someone named Rachel popped up right below the clock. Miss you, honey. Jason was asking yesterday when Daddy's coming up again for the weekend. Jason? Dad? I reread the message 3 times, as if the text might have changed from my stare. My hands trembled, but I quickly pulled myself together. I needed to see if it was a mistake. The phone unlocked easily. Tristan used the same password for everything: my date of birth. October 25th, 1959. 6 digits that unlocked his secrets. Funny how I was the key to his secrets. The history of messages with Rachel was long, years of correspondence, photos of a woman with soft features, about 15 years younger than me, and a boy blonde with Tristan's eyes. Photographs of Tristan and that child fishing in the park, at a holiday table with a cake with 7 candles. 7 years old. The boy had a birthday last week, and Tristan said he was leaving for a conference in Toronto. My throat dry, I sank to the edge of the bed. 40 years of marriage. And all those years I'd thought I'd known my husband. Naive old woman. I heard the front door slam. Tristan had returned from his run. I quickly put my phone down in exactly the same position and slid under the covers, pretending to be asleep. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought he would hear it from the bedroom threshold. Tristan walked in quietly, grabbed his phone, and retreated to the bathroom. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I was going to do with this information now. After breakfast, Tristan left for work. Our usual morning ritual went as usual. Scrambled eggs and bacon, toast, freshly squeezed orange juice for him, coffee for me. We talked about the weather, the news, plans for the evening. Not a muscle in his face gave away that he had a second family an hour away. As soon as the door closed behind him, I opened my laptop and started searching. Rachel. Not such a rare name. But when matched with the cell phone pictures, the mentions of Jason's son, it took me 2 hours to find her on social media. Rachel Cobb, 38, lives in Bedford, which is only 50 kilometers from our home in Halifax. Elementary school teacher. A charming little house with a white picket fence, and a boy who looks at the world through my husband's eyes. The next day I told Tristan I was going to visit an old friend. He didn't even ask which one. He just nodded and went back to reading the financial news. I took our second car, which I rarely used, and drove to Bedford. Rachel's house was exactly as it looked in the pictures. Neat, with a well-kept garden and children's toys on the lawn. I parked across the street and just sat watching. Around 3 in the afternoon, Rachel came home from work with Jason. The boy was in his school uniform, with a backpack over his shoulders. They entered the house, and after a while the lights came on in the windows. I sat in the car until evening. At 6:15, a familiar silver Lexus pulled up, Tristan's car. He told me he had a business dinner tonight with clients from Vancouver. I watched my husband get out of the car with a bouquet of flowers and a bag from the supermarket. As Jason runs out to meet him and Tristan picks him up in his arms, spinning him in the air. How the 3 of them disappear out the door of the house, and how that house becomes alive, glowing from within with a family happiness that Tristan and I hadn't had in our home in years. I didn't cry. Strangely, I didn't feel pain so much as anger, and an even stranger feeling, relief. As if the puzzle had finally come together and I realized the reason for Tristan's estrangement all these years. This trip was the first of many. For a week, I kept track of Tristan's schedule, his business trips, and evening meetings. I checked his credit cards, the bank accounts I had access to as a wife. I found a second secret account that he used to pay for Rachel's house, for Jason's private school tuition. With each new discovery, I realized the extent of his double life, and every day I grew more determined not to be a victim of this deception. Our son Hubert was always closer to his father. Tristan saw him as the successor of his business, took him to work with him from childhood, taught him the ins and outs of the business. Building materials is not the most romantic field, but Tristan turned his father's small firm into the largest supplier in eastern Canada. He was proud of his accomplishments and wanted his son to follow in his footsteps. Hubert took his father's business acumen, but with it a certain arrogance. He treated me condescendingly, as if I were a child who didn't understand the complexities of real business. He rarely called just to talk, only when he needed something. And his wife, Peyton, considered me a relic of the past. An old-fashioned housewife who only does what she does, bakes pies and knits sweaters. My grandchildren, twins Sean and Sabrina, treated me with the same polite detachment. They politely thanked me for their Christmas and birthday presents, but I could see them glancing over when I tried to strike up a conversation with them. To them, I was just an old grandmother who didn't understand the modern world. I wonder if Hubert knew about his father's second family, about his half-brother? Something told me he didn't. Tristan was a master of compartmentalizing, as the Americans say, putting life into separate cells that don't overlap with each other. 10 days after my discovery, Tristan announced that he was leaving for a weekend of golf with his partners. I smiled and wished him a good game. I drove myself to the office of Vincent Pritchard, the best family law attorney in Halifax. Mrs. Holmwood, Vincent shook my hand with his dry palm. What can I do for you? My husband leads a double life, I said without preamble. He has a second family in Bedford. The child is 7 years old. I want to know my rights. Vincent didn't seem shocked. Apparently, this kind of story was commonplace for him. What exactly do you want to get? Divorce? Compensation? I wondered. What did I want? Revenge on Tristan to punish him? To get my share of the family fortune? I want justice, I said at last. I've been a good wife for 40 years, raised his son, supported him when the business first started. And now I find out that for the last few years, he's been building a parallel life with another woman, having children, buying houses. I want what is rightfully mine. Vincent nodded and began to explain my options. Divorce, property division, alimony. Under Nova Scotia law, I was entitled to half of the marital estate, including the business, which was considered jointly owned, even if it was technically in Tristan's name. What happens to his second family? I asked. Technically, it's not a family in the legal sense, Vincent explained. Your husband's only marriage is to you. This woman, Rachel, is legally just a roommate. The child, if it's really your husband's, is entitled to financial support and a share of the inheritance, but nothing more. I felt sorry for Rachel. Maybe she didn't know the whole truth either. Perhaps Tristan had fed her tales of imminent retirement, of divorcing me, of their future together. What if I don't want a divorce? I asked. What if I want compensation for my silence? Vincent raised an eyebrow. Are you talking about blackmail, Mrs. Holmwood? I'm talking about fair compensation, I replied. My husband values his reputation. He's a respected businessman, a member of the Chamber of Commerce, a trustee of 3 charitable foundations. A double family scandal wouldn't be good for his image. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. In that case, you need to decide exactly what you want. Money? Real estate? Or maybe a stake in the business? I smiled. For the first time in days, I felt in control. A controlling interest in the company, I said firmly. I want 51% of Homewood Construction. Vincent whistled. That's ambitious, Mrs. Holmwood. Would your husband agree? He won't have a choice, I replied. It's either the stock or a scandal that will destroy not only his reputation, but the value of the company. The choice is obvious. Vincent explained that we'd need hard evidence of Tristan's double life. Photographs, records, financial documents, anything that could confirm the existence of a second family and the length of the relationship. I spent the next few days gathering that evidence. I took pictures of Tristan entering Rachel's house, playing with Jason in the park. I made copies of every financial document I could find. Recorded Tristan's phone conversations with Rachel when he called her from our house, thinking I was in the garden or at the store. And the more evidence I gathered, the stronger my resolve became. I won't let Tristan continue to play with my life. I will not allow myself to be tricked and robbed of what is rightfully mine. It was time to act. The evidence folder was getting thicker and thicker. I had gathered more information about my own husband's life in 2 weeks than I had in the last 5 years. Photographs, bank transaction printouts, phone records, all methodically sorted by date. I felt like a detective investigating a crime. In a way, I was. Tristan had stolen years of my life, stolen my honesty and trust. The bank statements were particularly revealing. Tristan had been generous to his second family, private school for Jason, a mortgage on a house in an upscale Bedford neighborhood, regular large transfers to Rachel's account, and all from funds that were legally our joint property. I'd driven by Jason's school several times. One day I saw Tristan picking him up after class. The boy ran out to him with such joy, such adoration in his eyes. At that moment, I felt a prick of conscience. What would happen to the child if I destroyed this idyll? But then I remembered the 40 years of lies, how Tristan had betrayed not only me, but also our son Hubert, who had never suspected a thing. Meanwhile, Vincent Pritchard was preparing the legal groundwork for our plan. He'd gathered information on the ownership structure of Homewood Construction, the procedure for transferring shares, the possible tax implications. "Your husband is smart, Mrs. Homewood," Vincent said at our third meeting. "He has created a rather complex ownership structure for the company. 70% of the shares are owned by him personally, 20% by a trust that manages your son Hubert's assets, and another 10% distributed among key employees. If you get 51% of Tristan's shares, it will give you control of the company, but not absolute power." "That's enough," I nodded. "I want control, not tyranny." Vincent hummed approvingly. "There is one more thing," he continued. "We have to be prepared for your husband to try to challenge the stock transfer later. He might claim that he was acting under duress. Do you have a solution?" "Yes. We'll draw up a contract to make it look like Tristan's voluntary decision to provide for you in the event of his death or incapacity, a kind of insurance policy for you. It will look like a show of concern, not the result of blackmail." I smiled. Vincent was not only a good lawyer, but also a subtle psychologist. "And," Vincent lowered his voice, even though we were alone in his office, "you need to decide what to do with the information about your husband's second family. Do you plan to tell your son?" I wondered. Hubert idolized his father. It would be a blow to him to learn of his double life. On the other hand, he had a right to know the truth. "Not yet," I answered. "I'll deal with Tristan first. Then I'll decide what to do next." It took another week to finalize the preparations. Vincent prepared all the necessary paperwork. I chose a day when Tristan and I had no plans, a normal Tuesday. We both had to be home in the evening. Over dinner, Tristan was in a good mood. He talked about the new contract with the provincial government, about plans to expand production. I listened with a smile, thinking that in an hour his world would be turned upside down. After dinner, when we moved into the living room, I brought out the evidence folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. "What is it?" Tristan asked, looking away from the clipboard. "Rachel and Jason," I answered simply, looking him straight in the eye. His face froze. He stared at me for a second, unblinking, then shifted his gaze to the folder. "What are you talking about?" "Don't, Tristan." I shook my head. "I know everything. About your second family in Bedford, about your 7-year-old son, about the house with the white picket fence, about the school fees and the regular business dinners on Thursdays." He was silent, contemplating the situation. I could see the various scenarios running through his head as he evaluated the options of denial, justification, confession. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "Long enough to put this together." I opened the folder and began laying out pictures, printouts, notes. Tristan stared at the evidence of his double life with an unreadable expression on his face. Then he stood up and poured himself a whiskey. Didn't offer it to me, for the first time in all our years of family conversations. "So what now?" he asked, taking a big sip. "Divorce? A scandal? What do you want, Beryl?" "Justice," I replied. 40 years I've been your wife. A real wife, not the one you forgot existed when you went back to your other family." "I never forgot about you," Tristan said quietly. "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "It's a strange way to remember having another woman, another child." "It's hard to explain." "Don't even try. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm interested in compensation." Tristan tensed up. How much? I laughed. You think money solves everything? No, Tristan, I want 51% of Homewood construction. He choked on his whiskey. What, are you crazy? That's impossible. It is possible. I pulled out a folder of documents Vincent had prepared from my bag. Here's the stock transfer agreement. It's written as your voluntary decision to provide for me in the event of your death or incapacity. That's very thoughtful of you. I'm not signing it, Tristan cut him off. Then I'm going to the Halifax Herald with a story about an honorable businessman, Chamber of Commerce member, and charity trustee who's been leading a double life for years. Can you imagine the headlines? Tristan Holmwood, successful businessman by day, bigamist by night. What do you think your partners will say? Your clients? The government officials you just contracted with? Tristan turned pale. You won't do it. I will, I said firmly. I have no reason to spare you. You haven't spared me all these years. What about Hubert? You'll ruin his reputation too. Don't try to play on my maternal feelings, Tristan. Hubert's a grown man. He'll get over this scandal. After all, he wasn't the one leading a double life. Tristan sat down, wrapping his arms around his head. Give me time to think. 24 hours, I said. This time tomorrow, I expect your decision. Stocks or scandal? Tristan spent a sleepless night. I could hear him pacing around his office, talking on the phone, typing something on his computer. I stayed awake listening to those sounds too, ready to intercept him at any moment if he decided to destroy some documents or contact Rachel. In the morning, he looked exhausted. He drank his coffee in silence and left for work. All day, I waited for his call, a message, some sign, but he didn't contact me. At 8 p.m. sharp, just as we'd agreed, Tristan came home. He walked into the living room carrying a leather briefcase, which he set on the table. I agree, he said without preamble. But I have conditions. I'm listening, I replied, keeping my outward composure, though inside I was jubilant. First, this stays between us. Hubert must not know the reasons for the stock transfer. Second, you will not interfere with the operational management of the company as long as I am alive. Third, you have no contact with Rachel or Jason under any circumstances. I thought about his terms. They seemed reasonable. I agree, but with one correction. I don't interfere with the company as long as you run it in good faith. No shenanigans, no attempts to remove assets, no dishonest dealings with relatives or friends. Tristan nodded. Fair enough. He pulled the documents out of his briefcase, the same ones Vincent had prepared, but with a few changes made by Tristan's corporate lawyers. Just as you wanted, he said, handing me the papers. 51% of the stock goes to you as care for the future of your beloved wife. I read the papers carefully. Everything looked right. Tristan was really giving me a controlling interest in his company. Sign, he said, holding out a pen. I signed where indicated. Tristan signed next to it. Tomorrow I'll take this to the corporate secretary for registration, he said. In 3 business days, the stock will officially be yours. I nodded, still not believing that my plan had worked so easily. So now what? Tristan asked, tucking the documents into his briefcase. Now we go on with our lives, I answered. You run the company. I do my own thing. You keep seeing your other family. I don't interfere. The only change is now I have insurance in case you decide to cheat on me. Tristan stared at me for a long time, as if he were seeing me for the first time. You know, he said finally, I've always underestimated you, Beryl. I thought you were predictable, domestic. Today I realized how wrong I was. With those words, he got up and left the room. I stayed sitting, watching the door close behind him, and only now did I feel my hands shaking. I had done it. I stood up to the husband who had dominated our family all my life, and I won. The next 3 days passed in a strange tension. Tristan and I barely spoke, avoided eating meals together, tried not to cross paths in the house. He came home late, left early. I knew he was spending time with Rachel and Jason, but that knowledge didn't hurt anymore. I got what I wanted, my share of the business I'd helped build over the years. On the 3rd day, Tristan came home in an unusually good mood. He even offered to have wine with me, the first friendly gesture since our confrontation. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. I tapped it warily. The papers are registered, Tristan said. As of tomorrow, you officially own a controlling interest in Homewood Construction. I've arranged for you to have access to the corporate reports and information systems. Thank you, I said with restraint. I didn't think I'd ever say this, but I'm kind of relieved, Tristan admitted. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. No more hiding, no more lies, at least to you. I didn't say anything. His sudden candor seemed suspicious. Was he up to something? Beryl, I want you to know, Tristan continued. I've never stopped caring about you. Just because I have another family doesn't mean you're any less important to me. Please spare me the platitudes. I set my glass down. We made a business agreement. There's no need to turn this into melodrama. Tristan sighed. Whatever you say, just know that I don't hold a grudge against you for what you did. I would have done the same thing if I were you. With those words, he stood up and headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. I'm going to bed early tonight. Tomorrow is a big day. The presentation of the quarterly report to the board of directors. I nodded and got up to put the glasses away. When I entered the kitchen, I heard a strange sound upstairs. A thud, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. Tristan? I called out as I approached the stairs. There was no answer. I went upstairs and saw him lying on the floor of the hallway. His face was contorted in a grimace of pain, holding his chest. Heart! He wheezed. Call! I rushed to the phone and dialed the emergency services. I explained the situation, gave them the address. Then I went back to Tristan. His breathing was labored, his face pale. Hold on, I said, taking his hand. The ambulance is on its way. Beryl, he whispered. I'm sorry. Don't talk now. I stroked his head. Save your strength. But Tristan continued. I have to tell Rachel, take care of her and Jason. It's not his fault. It's going to be okay. I tried to sound confident. The ambulance was coming, but I could see in his eyes that he knew he didn't have much time. His grip on my arm was weakening. Promise, he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't make a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. When the ambulance arrived, Tristan was still alive, but unconscious. The paramedics quickly loaded him onto a stretcher and carried him to the car. I followed in my car, dialing Hubert's number on the way. He didn't answer. He was probably in some kind of meeting or dinner. At the hospital, Tristan was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. The doctor, a full woman with tired eyes, told me that my husband was having a serious heart attack and they were doing everything they could. I sat in the hallway feeling strangely numb. I couldn't believe that just an hour ago, Tristan and I were drinking wine and talking about the future. Fate had chosen a strange moment for such a turn. It was as if she had been waiting for this case to be over. 2 hours later, the doctor came out. I could tell by the look on his face before he spoke. I'm sorry, Mrs. Homewood, he said. We did everything we could. Tristan died at the age of 68 from a massive myocardial infarction, 3 days after he signed over controlling interest in his company to me. The day of the funeral was surprisingly sunny. Late April in Halifax is usually rainy and dreary, but today the sky was clear, as if nature had decided to bid Tristan Homewood a fitting farewell. I stared out the window of the limousine as it drove slowly toward St. Matthew's, and thought about how strange life was. A week ago, I was preparing for a fight with my husband, and now I was going to his funeral. Hubert sat next to me. Pale, sunken eyes, he hadn't said a word since he got in the car. His wife Peyton and the twins were in the next car. They looked appropriate for the occasion, straight clothes, restrained expressions on their faces. But I could see Sean checking messages on his phone every now and then, and Sabrina nervously fixing her hair while looking in her pocket mirror. For them, their grandfather's death was certainly a sad event, but not significant enough to interrupt the normal course of their lives. The church was filled to capacity. Members of the Halifax business community, business partners, clients, politicians with whom Tristan had kept in touch, all came to pay their respects to the man who had built one of the most successful companies in Nova Scotia. I spotted the mayor of the city, several members of the provincial parliament, even a federal minister flying in from Ottawa. I looked around for Rachel and Jason, but I couldn't find them. Perhaps she'd decided not to come out of respect for Hubert and me, or more likely, she just didn't want to risk showing up at a public ceremony where no one was expecting her or knew her. The coffin stood before the altar, closed, covered with a wreath of white lilies, Tristan's favorite flowers. I remembered how he always brought me lilies on our wedding anniversary, no matter the season. I wondered if he'd given the same ones to Rachel. The priest began the service. He spoke about life and death, the legacy a person leaves behind, the comfort we find in faith. I listened, half listening, immersed in my own thoughts. What does a widow feel at the funeral of a husband who led a double life? Grief, anger, relief? All of these emotions mingled within me, creating a strange numbness. After the priest, Hubert took the floor. He spoke of his father as an inspiring example, his business acumen, his integrity, his devotion to his family. I listened to this idealized version of Tristan and wondered if my son knew about his father's second family. From his words, from his sincere grief, I knew he did not. To him, Tristan was an impeccable father, a role model. Would he ever learn the truth? Should he? After the church service, the procession moved to Camp Hill Cemetery, where our family had a plot. Tristan's parents were already laid to rest there. Now their son was joining them. The farewell ceremony was short. A few words from the priest, parting glances, a handful of earth on the coffin lid. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My tears had dried up in the hospital, the night Tristan died in my arms. After the cemetery, everyone went to our house where a memorial dinner was organized. The catering service had set up tables in the living room and on the terrace, and waiters in smart suits were serving drinks and appetizers. Everything was impeccably organized. Hubert had personally handled the preparations, not trusting me with the process. "You've been through too much already, Mom," he said. "Let me take care of it." I accepted condolences, shook hands, listened to stories of what a wonderful man Tristan was. An old golf partner recalled their games together. A business partner spoke of his integrity in business. A neighbor talked about how Tristan had helped his son get into college. All of these people knew only one side of Tristan Holmwood. None of them suspected the existence of Rachel and Jason, the house with the white picket fence in Bedford, the second life he so carefully hid. I smiled, nodded, thanked them for their warm words. I played the part of the grieving widow who lost her beloved husband after 40 years together. And only occasionally, when no one was looking, I allowed myself to close my eyes for a moment and exhale. This performance was wearing me out more than I expected. Toward evening, when most of the guests had gone, Hubert came up to me with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes were red, either from alcohol or tears. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. "Alone." I nodded and we walked to Tristan's office. This room had always been his territory. The dark oak paneling, the leather chair, the walls lined with diplomas and certificates. It smelled of his cologne, of the tobacco he sometimes indulged in despite the doctor's prohibitions. His presence was still felt here. Hubert closed the door tightly and turned to me. There was a determination in his gaze that I'd only seen in Tristan's before. "I know this isn't a good time," he began, "but we need to discuss some practical matters." "I'm listening," I replied, sitting down in the visitor's chair. I wondered how many people were sitting in that chair, waiting for Tristan Holmwood's decision. How many fates were decided in this room? Hubert opened the safe hidden behind the painting, the seascape that Tristan had bought for our 20th anniversary. I'd always thought it was tasteless, but he loved it for some reason. Hubert pulled a file from the safe and placed it on the table. "My father left clear instructions in case he died," he said, opening the folder. "He was always a prudent man." I watched my son in silence. He looked so much like Tristan at that moment. The same turn of the shoulders, the way he held his head. Genetics is an amazing thing. According to his will, Hubert continued, pulling out the papers, I am the primary heir. The company, this house, most of the assets, everything goes to me. He handed me the papers. I took them, but I didn't read them. I already knew what they contained. "Of course, they've taken care of you too," Hubert added. "You're left with a decent sum of money, enough to live comfortably, and a country house in Chester." I was silent, watching the expression on my son's face. He spoke sympathetically, but there was impatience in his eyes. Was he waiting for my reaction? Tears? Objections? Gratitude? How is a mother supposed to feel when her son practically evicts her from her own home on the day of her husband's funeral? "I know it's hard," Hubert continued. misinterpreting my silence. But my father wanted to keep the business in good hands, my hands. He always said women weren't cut out to run such complex structures. I almost laughed. Tristan never said anything like that. On the contrary, he always praised my business acumen, my common sense. If you wanted to, Beryl, you could run a company as well as I could, he'd told me once, when I'd helped him resolve a difficult situation with his suppliers. And when do you plan? Inherit? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Legally, I already have, Hubert answered. My father had arranged everything to avoid a lengthy inheritance procedure, a special trust, a lifetime transfer of assets. It's all legal and clean. He took another document out of the folder and put it in front of me. Here, I've prepared an agreement for your relocation. Like I said, you keep the house in Chester. I've had it cleaned up. You can move in as soon as you're ready. I've got the document. Agreement for voluntary release of real estate, the headline read. My name was already typed into the appropriate fields. All that was left was to sign it. When do you think I should be ready? I asked, putting the paper aside. Hubert looked a little embarrassed. Well, I'm not rushing you, of course. A week, 2. I think a month would be enough time to pack and mentally prepare for the move. A month. My son was giving me a month to leave the house I'd lived in for 40 years. The house I helped pick out furnished the house I raised him in. What will happen to this house, I asked. Do you plan to live here? No, Hubert shook his head. Peyton and I have a beautiful house in Bedford. This one is too old-fashioned for us. I'm planning on selling it. There's already a potential buyer. Richard Hampton, you know him? He's had his eye on this property for a while. Richard Hampton, Tristan's rival, a man my husband hated. And Hubert was planning on selling our family home to him. It was almost comical. What about the company? I continued. What are your plans? Oh, I have big plans, Hubert perked up. Dad was conservative in his management. Too cautious. I'm planning aggressive expansion, entering international markets. I'm already in talks with investors from Dubai. As I listened to my son talk about his grand plans, I thought about how quickly he'd forgotten his grief. Tristan's body was still in the grave, and Hubert was already planning to reshape everything his father had created. You have nothing to worry about, Mother, he concluded, apparently mistaking my silence for concern. Your financial situation is secure. Your father has given you a substantial sum, enough to last you the rest of your life, even if you decide to travel or find other hobbies. He spoke to me as if I were a child or an old man, as if I needed to be told basic things. What if I don't agree? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. Hubert frowned. Disagree with what? Your plans? Selling the house. With me moving to Chester. He looked at me with a look of bewilderment that was quickly replaced by a condescending smile. Mom, I know you're upset. Losing your father is a hard blow to all of us. But it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. These are legally binding documents. Dad's will, the trust deed, the deed of trust, the property transfer documents, all officially certified and recorded. He leaned across the table to me, took my hands in his. I care about you, Mom, just like your father did. You don't have to think about business, real estate, complicated financial decisions. It's all my responsibility now. Your job is to rest and enjoy the peace you deserve. I released my hands and stood up. Thank you for your concern, Hubert. Consider your offer. He stood up too, clearly satisfied with my reaction. Of course you will. There's no need to decide anything today. I'll send my assistant over tomorrow to help you with the paperwork. I nodded and headed for the door. I turned around on the threshold. You know, your father always said that the most important thing in business is to keep your guard up. Never consider a job finished until you get a signed contract, he used to say. Hubert smiled. Yes, that sounds like him. Don't worry, Mom. All the contracts are signed and registered. I left the study, quietly closing the door behind me. There were still a few guests in the living room, but I didn't go back to them. I went up to my bedroom with Tristan, closed the door, and sat on the bed. I took out my phone and dialed Vincent Pritchard's number. Everything's going according to plan, I said when he answered. Hubert showed me the documents that supposedly entitle him to the entire inheritance. He is convinced that the company belongs to him. Just as we suspected, Vincent replied. Tristan probably didn't tell him about the transfer to you in time, or chose not to. What now? We wait for the official announcement of the will. It's scheduled for Wednesday, 5 days from now. Your son will get a surprise there. I nodded, even though Vincent couldn't see it. Good. Until Wednesday, I'll play the role of the dutiful mother who's resigned to her fate. That's an excellent plan, Mrs. Holmwood. My condolences on your husband's passing. I said thank you and passed out. I went to the window, looking out over the garden into the evening twilight. Somewhere in the backyard, the last guests of the memorial dinner were still there. They were drinking whiskey, remembering Tristan, talking about his accomplishments and legacy. And upstairs in the bedroom, his widow was preparing to do battle with her own son over what was rightfully hers. What would you say now, Tristan? I thought, looking at the family photo on the dresser. The three of us, Tristan, me, and little Hubert, about 5 years old, a happy family, or one that played the role of happy family well. I decided to wait for the official reading of the will. Let Hubert think he'd won, that he'd gotten everything he wanted. Let him enjoy his triumph. I'd still have time to show him that his father hadn't taught him all the lessons of business. The morning after the funeral, Hubert showed up at the house with two men in strict suits. They gave me a polite nod and went straight to Tristan's office. The closed door and muffled voices made it clear that my presence there was unwelcome. These are the financial consultants, Hubert said when I asked who they were. We're discussing the company's strategy. I nodded as if I trusted him completely and went back to the kitchen to make coffee. Through the window, I saw two more cars pull up, and other men with briefcases and files got out. Hubert met them at the door and led them into the living room, now a temporary conference room. Our house, which had been filled with mournful silence yesterday, was now buzzing like a disturbed beehive. By lunchtime, Tristan's secretary, Evelyn, came out of her office with red eyes. She'd worked with my husband for over 20 years and was as devoted to him as anyone could be. Mrs. Holmwood, she approached me, lowering her voice. Your son? He's firing everyone close to Mr. Holmwood. Me, Ronald the CFO, Patrick the production manager. They're all being replaced by his people. I squeezed her hand in mine. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. Tristan really appreciated you. I know, she wiped away a tear. I don't understand how Mr. Hubert can do this. The company had just lost its founder and he was already rearranging everything. At that moment, the office door opened and Hubert came out. When he saw us, he frowned. Evelyn, are you still here? I thought you had already packed your things. I was just saying goodbye to your mother, Mr. Holmwood, she said, straightening her back. And I want to tell you that your father would be disappointed in your actions. Hubert grinned. My father understood the business and the need for change. Now, if you don't mind, we have more important business to attend to than sentimental farewells. Evelyn pressed her lips together, nodded goodbye to me, and headed for the exit. I stared after her, feeling a growing irritation with my son. Was it necessary to fire her? I asked when Evelyn left. She'd been loyal to the company all these years. Loyalty to your father is not the same as loyalty to the company, Hubert said. I need people who share my vision of the future, not cling to the past. With those words, he went back into the office without giving me a chance to object. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, and thinking about how quickly my son had turned his father's house into his headquarters without regard for my feelings. The next few days passed in a similar fashion. Hubert practically took up residence in our house, turning it into a branch office of Holmwood Construction. He would arrive early in the morning, bringing with him new people, lawyers, consultants, managers, and leave late at night. They occupied Tristan's office, the living room, even the dining room, laying out blueprints and plans for new projects. No one invited me to these meetings. I became almost invisible in my own home, moving between the kitchen and the bedroom, trying not to interfere with the important business discussions. One day I heard Hubert talking on the phone in the garden, thinking no one could hear him. Yes, Mom is here for now, but it's temporary, he was saying. I've already found a buyer for the house. As soon as the deal closes, she'll move to Chester. No, she doesn't mind. She's always been docile. Daddy had complete control over all the decisions. Of course, I'll leave her enough money so she doesn't need anything. I'm not a monster, Peyton. I quietly stepped away from the window so as not to give away my presence. Compliant, completely in control. So that's how my son had seen me all these years, an unwilling appendage to his overbearing father. Well, he's about to find out how wrong he was. On Monday, Hubert went to the company's headquarters for the first time. Until then, he had preferred to work from home, but it was probably time for him to introduce himself to the employees as the new owner. He returned in high spirits. "Everything is going great," he said over dinner, which he unexpectedly joined. "People are excited about the changes. Many admit that they've been waiting for a leadership upgrade for a long time." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. Evelyn told me that the employees were worried about mass layoffs. Hubert dismissed it. "Evelyn's exaggerating. We're streamlining the structure, getting rid of duplicate functions. It's a normal process when there's a change in leadership." "What about the contract with the provincial government?" I asked. Tristan said it was an important project. Hubert looked at me in surprise. "Did you follow the company's affairs?" "Your father sometimes discussed business matters with me." I shrugged. "I'm not as far removed from business as you think." "It's good to hear you're interested," Hubert said condescendingly. "As for the government contract, we are refocusing on more lucrative projects. Government contracts are stable, but margins are low. But Tristan always said that such contracts are prestige and guaranteed income in the long run." "Dad was too conservative." Hubert cut off a piece of steak. "Modern business requires a more aggressive approach. We are negotiating with Arab investors for a joint project in Dubai. That's where the real money is." I remained silent, even though I had many questions. Tristan had always avoided international ventures, believing that it was better to be a leader in the local market than a small fish in the global ocean. But Hubert obviously had a different opinion. That evening, I called Ronald Ferguson, the CFO of Holmwood Construction and an old friend of Tristan's. He was one of the people Hubert was planning to fire. "Ronald, this is Beryl. How are you?" "I'm hanging in there, Beryl." Ronald's voice sounded tired. "Have you heard the news? Your son's doing a real cleanup job at the company." "Yes, I've heard the rumors. What's really going on?" Ronald sighed. "Hubert is replacing all the key executives with his own people. Many of them used to work with him at his investment firm, young, ambitious, but with no experience in the construction industry. He has already canceled 2 long-term projects that Tristan considered strategically important." "What about the company's finances?" "As far as I know, it's stable so far, but I'm concerned about his plans to attract outside investment for new projects. He wants to mortgage a significant part of the company's assets to get capital for expansion into the Middle East." "Is that risky?" "Extremely, especially for a company that's always grown on its own." Tristan was against debt financing. I thanked Ronald for the information and promised to keep in touch. The situation was becoming more and more alarming. Hubert wasn't just changing personnel. He was completely reorienting the company's strategy his father had spent decades building. The next day, Tuesday, the board of directors was scheduled. Hubert left early in the morning, saying he'd be back late. I took advantage of his absence to meet with Vincent Pritchard. "Tomorrow is the official reading of the will," Vincent said as we sat down in a cafe near my house. "All the documents are ready. The estate attorney has already received copies of the share transfer agreement your husband signed." "What do you think Hubert's reaction will be?" I asked, stirring my untouched coffee. "Predictably negative," Vincent shrugged. "He thinks he inherited the controlling interest, and he finds out that his father gave it to you just days before he died. He'll probably be shocked, then angry, and try to challenge the deal." "On what grounds?" "Most likely incapacity of the signatory or duress. He may claim that Tristan was unable to make rational decisions due to illness, or that you manipulated him in some way." "Does he stand a chance?" "Minimal," Vincent answered confidently. "We've drawn up the documents perfectly. There is the notary's testimony that Tristan was of sound mind and acted voluntarily. There's a videotape of the signing procedure where he clearly explains his motives. Plus, the corporate secretary has already registered the share transfer in the company registry. Legally, you've owned a controlling interest in Holmwood Construction since last Friday." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Tomorrow, my son would learn the truth, and our lives wouldn't be the same. "I need to get ready for tomorrow," I said, finishing my coffee. Do you think I should warn Hubert beforehand? Absolutely not. Vincent shook his head. Make it official with the attorney and witnesses present. It would give him less room for maneuver. That evening, Hubert returned home in high spirits. The board of directors had been a success, all his proposals had been approved. Of course, given that he had replaced half the board with his own people, it was hard to expect any other result. We're launching a new product line, he told me over dinner. Environmentally friendly building materials. It's an emerging market and we could be a leader. That sounds interesting, I replied neutrally. Tristan was also interested in green technology. Yes, but he only talked about it and I acted. Hubert poured himself some wine. By the way, I think you should start packing. The house in Chester is ready for you to move in. So soon? I raised an eyebrow. It's only been 3 days since the funeral. Business doesn't wait, Mom. Hubert shrugged. Besides, I think you could use a change of scenery. Too many memories here. I didn't say anything, thinking that tomorrow his plans for me would change significantly. Wednesday morning began as usual. Hubert arrived for breakfast, talked to someone on the phone about another personnel change, then reminded me about the reading of the will, scheduled for 11 o'clock at the probate attorney's office. It's a formality, he said, but attendance is essential. Can you handle it? Of course, I nodded. I'll be ready by 10:30. The office of Gerald Howard, the hereditary attorney, was in an old building in downtown Halifax. It had a classic interior, heavy furniture, dim lighting, and an air of solidity and tradition. In addition to Hubert and me, his wife Peyton, Homewood Construction's corporate lawyer Miles Pearson, and, to my surprise, Ronald Ferguson, attended the reading. Hubert frowned when he saw him. Mr. Ferguson, I didn't expect to see you here. I was named in Mr. Homewood's will as a witness, Ronald replied calmly. Mr. Howard invited me. Hubert pressed his lips together in frustration, but remained silent. We all sat down at a long table, at the head of which Gerald Howard, an elderly man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, was seated. Thank you all for coming, he began, putting on his glasses. We are gathered here to formally announce Tristan Homewood's last will and testament, as expressed in his will, dated March 15th of this year. Howard began to read out the standard wording of the will. Hubert listened impatiently, occasionally glancing at his watch. He evidently regarded this procedure as a mere formality. Now let's move on to the distribution of the estate, Howard continued. Tristan Homewood will bequeath to his son Hubert Homewood 20% of the shares in Homewood Construction, which are already in a trust administered for him, as well as the country house in Chester with all the property there. Hubert straightened, a look of bewilderment on his face. I'm sorry, Mr. Howard. There must be some mistake. My father owned 70% of the company. I should inherit all of them. Howard looked at him calmly over his glasses. There is no mistake, Mr. Homewood. At the time of your father's death, he owned only 19% of the company, which he bequeathed to the Nova Scotia Education Charitable Trust. The remaining 51% was transferred by him to your mother, Beryl Homewood, 3 days before his death. There was silence. Hubert turned slowly toward me, his face contorted with disbelief and shock. What? Howard pulled another document out of the folder. This is a stock transfer agreement signed by Tristan Homewood and Beryl Homewood, notarized and registered in the company's share register. According to the document, Tristan Homewood voluntarily transferred a controlling interest in the stock to his wife, in recognition of her contribution to the family business and as security for her future. Hubert snatched the document from Howard's hands and began to study it feverishly. His face grew bloodshot. It's a forgery, he finally said. Father would never have done this. He always said the company would go to me. The document is genuine, Mr. Homewood, Howard replied calmly. Your father's signature is notarized. There is a videotape of the signing procedure where Tristan Homewood clearly expresses his will. That's impossible! Hubert slammed his fist on the table. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. On the contrary, Ronald Ferguson intervened. Tristan was fully conscious and of sound mind. I was present at the signing of the document as a witness. Hubert looked at me. His eyes were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and growing rage. You, he gasped with anger. You manipulated him. You took advantage of his weakness. You made him sign that piece of paper when he was no longer himself. I met his gaze calmly. Your father was fully conscious, Hubert. He offered to give me the controlling interest himself. He thought it was only fair, given my contribution to the company over the years. Liar. Hubert jumped up. What contribution? You never worked for the company. You were just a wife, a housewife. Tristan didn't think so, I replied calmly. He valued my advice, my support, my loyalty. I said the last word with special significance. I didn't think Hubert had picked up on the implication of his father's double life, but the phrase itself had struck a nerve. I'll argue it, he hissed. I'll prove that you forced him to sign those papers. That he was incapacitated. You may try, Mr. Holmwood, interposed Gerald Howard. But I must warn you that the evidence of your father's capacity at the time of signing is very strong. Moreover, the transfer of the shares has already been registered with the appropriate authorities. Legally, your mother has owned a controlling interest in Holmwood Construction since last Friday. Hubert shifted his gaze to his lawyer. Miles, explain it to them. There must be some mistake. Father couldn't have done this. Miles Pearson, a young man in an expensive suit, looked confused. Yeah, I didn't know about this document, he admitted. But if it's authentic and properly executed, I'm afraid it does make a difference. Hubert turned to me again. His eyes narrowed. So you've been pretending all this time, playing the part of the dutiful mother who accepted her fate. But in reality, you already knew the company belonged to you. I was just waiting for the official reading of the will, I said. As you should in these situations. And now what? Hubert's voice shook with rage. What are you going to do with the company? You don't understand anything about business. I understand enough to know that your aggressive development plans could destroy what your father spent 40 years building, I said firmly. I won't let that happen. Hubert laughed, but there was no mirth in his laughter. You won't? And how will you do that? Will you personally run the company? Sort out the financial statements? Hold meetings? Negotiate with clients? If I have to, yes, I nodded. But most likely I'll bring back those experienced employees that you so hastily fired. Those who really know the company and the industry. Hubert clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. I won't let you ruin my inheritance, he hissed. I will challenge this stock transfer in court. I'll prove that you manipulated my father, that you forced him to sign those papers. You can try, I shrugged. But like Mr. Howard said, the evidence of your father's capacity is pretty compelling. Hubert grabbed his briefcase from the table and headed for the exit. At the door, he turned around. This isn't over, Mother. You'll regret what you've done. With those words, he walked out, slamming the door so hard that a painting nearly fell off the wall. Peyton, who had been silently watching the scene until then, looked at me confused, then hurried after her husband. There was silence in the office. Gerald Howard coughed. Well, that was emotional, he said. Mrs. Holmwood, there are a few more formalities we need to discuss. Howard, Ronald, and I spent the next hour going over the details of my taking possession. I had to sign a few documents, confirm my bank details for dividends, and a few other technical matters. When everything was finished, Ronald offered me a ride home. Oh, what do you think Hubert will do? I asked as we got into his car. He'll probably go to the lawyers, try to find loopholes in the documents, Ronald answered. But Vincent Pritchard is one of the best lawyers in town. I doubt Hubert will find anything substantial. And at the company? What could he undertake there? Ronald wondered. He's still a minority shareholder and technically the CEO until the board appoints a new one. He could try to move assets out, make deals that aren't good for the company, turn the staff against you. So we need to move fast, I decided. I want an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Will you help me organize it? Sure, Ronald nodded. But keep in mind that Hubert has already replaced some of the board members with his own people. That's okay, I smiled. I have a controlling interest. My vote is enough to make most of the decisions. When we got to the house, I saw Hubert's car parked out front. So he's already here, waiting for me to continue the conversation. Do you want me to come in with you? Ronald asked. No, I shook my head. This is a family conversation. I can handle it. I got out of the car and headed toward the house, preparing for an uneasy confrontation with my son. Now that the truth was out, We had to determine the new rules of the game, and I was determined to emerge victorious from this fight. 3 months flew by like a day. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I would be managing a construction company with a turnover of tens of millions of dollars, I would have laughed. But life comes with the most unexpected surprises. After that memorable reading of the will, a real corporate upheaval began. Hubert, as promised, filed a lawsuit challenging the stock transfer. He argued that Tristan had signed the documents under duress, in a sick state, not realizing the consequences of his actions. But the court did not accept his arguments. The video recording of the signing procedure, the testimony of the notary and witnesses, the medical report on Tristan's state of health at the time, everything spoke in my favor. At the same time as the trial, there was a struggle for control of the company. The first thing I did was to call an emergency board meeting to present my vision for the future of Homewood construction. Hubert didn't show up, which played right into my hands. I'm not going to destroy what my husband has built, I told the board. On the contrary, I want to preserve and enhance his legacy, to return to the core principles that made this company successful: quality, reliability, honesty with customers and partners. Most of the directors supported me, even those brought in by Hubert. They were professionals and saw that my approach was more sensible than my son's risky plans. The first major decision was the appointment of a new CEO. I didn't apply for the position. I didn't have the necessary experience. Instead, I nominated Patrick Mackenzie, Tristan's longtime deputy, whom Hubert was quick to dismiss. Patrick knows the company inside out, I explained to the board. He has worked with Tristan for over 15 years and shares his vision for the business. The board unanimously approved Patrick's nomination. That same day, Hubert's most risky initiatives were canceled, including a project in Dubai that could have been a financial disaster. The following weeks were spent in intensive work. I came to the office every morning, familiarized myself with the departments, delved into documents, and participated in meetings. Many employees were wary of me at first, the boss's wife who had suddenly become a major shareholder. But gradually the ice melted. They saw that I was genuinely interested in the success of the company and willing to listen to those who work in it. Ronald Ferguson, reinstated as CFO, became my mentor in the world of corporate finance. Evelyn returned to her position as secretary to the CEO and helped me sort through the huge archive of documents that Tristan had left behind. "He would have been proud of you, Mrs. Holmwood," Evelyn once told me. "You've turned out to be much more competent than most people expected." I smiled back. The compliment was nice, though I knew there was still much to learn. Hubert didn't give up. After losing in court, he tried to block my decisions through the minority shareholders, but without success. He then started spreading rumors among clients and partners that the company was going through a management crisis. I had to personally meet with key clients to refute these speculations. In early July, when the litigation finally ended in my favor, I decided to make changes to the shareholder structure. After consulting with lawyers and financial advisors, I offered to buy out Hubert's stake at market value. "That makes sense," Patrick agreed. "As long as he remains a shareholder, he will continue to cause problems." The offer was routed through the lawyers. The sum was more than generous, 20% above market value. I expected Hubert to refuse out of principle, but a week later I heard back that he was willing to do the deal. "He's exhausted his financial reserves on litigation," Ronald explained when I expressed surprise. "And his investment company seems to be going through a bad time. He needs the money." The deal closed at the end of July. Hubert got his millions and was officially no longer part of Homewood Construction. I thought that was the end of our saga, but I was wrong. In early August, exactly 3 months after Tristan's funeral, I came home after a day of work and found Hubert's car in the driveway. He was sitting on the porch by himself, as if waiting for me to return. "Hi, Mom," he said, rising to meet me. "We need to talk." I nodded and invited him into the house. We walked into the living room, the same one where I'd once confronted Tristan with a folder of evidence of his double life. Now there was another difficult explanation to be had here. Hubert looked drained. He'd lost weight, shadows under his eyes. Normally impeccable in his clothes, today he wore a wrinkled shirt and stale pants. "Would you like a drink?" I offered. "Whiskey, if you have it," he replied. I poured him a drink and sat down across from him. I'm listening. Hubert took a big sip and set the glass down. I came to apologize, Mother, for everything I said to you, for the way I acted after my father died. I stared at him in silence, waiting for him to continue. I was wrong, he continued. Blinded by ambition, convinced I was right. I thought I knew how to run the company better, but the last few months have shown me I was wrong. What exactly were you wrong about? I asked him. Everything, he said. In my assessment of the situation, in my strategy, in my attitude toward you. I underestimated you, Mom. I thought you were just a housewife who didn't know anything about business. But you're much more competent than I realized. I listened to his apology with an ambivalent feeling. On the one hand, it was nice to finally hear my abilities recognized by my son, who had always looked down on me. On the other hand, I felt there was some practical interest behind it. And what brought you to this realization? I asked. Hubert sighed. I'd been following the company for months. I've seen the financial reports, news of new contracts. You and Patrick are doing the right thing. You're going back to the foundations your father laid, but you're not abandoning innovation. That environmental project you launched in June, it's brilliant. I nodded. The Green Building Materials project was one of my first initiatives. Not as ambitious as Hubert's plans to enter Middle Eastern markets, but much more realistic and promising in the long term. What are you getting at, Hubert? I decided not to beat around the bush. He took another sip of whiskey. I want to come back to the company, Mom, not as an owner. I realize that train has left. But as a manager, as a specialist, I have knowledge, experience, connections that could be useful to Homewood construction. That's it. I wasn't surprised. I was expecting something like that. What about your investment firm? I asked. Hubert looked away. We're going through some bad times. Several projects have turned out to be unprofitable. Then there's the legal expenses. So we've had to cut back on staff and office space. In other words, you're on the verge of bankruptcy, I said. Not exactly, he countered. But it's a difficult situation. That's why I thought, coming back into the family business could be a fresh start. For me, for you and me. I thought about it. The suggestion was unexpected, though logical. Hubert had always been ambitious, and now that his own business was failing, he was looking for salvation where he felt most confident, in his father's company. What position do you see for yourself? I asked. Director of Development, Hubert answered without hesitation. I could work on new projects, finding partners, expanding the business. But within reasonable limits, of course, he added quickly, seeing my skeptical look. No ventures with Arab investors, I promise. I stood up and walked to the window. Beyond it was the garden I'd recently renovated, planting new roses to replace the ones Tristan favored. A small symbol of my new independent life. You know, Hubert, I said without turning around, when your father died, you didn't even wait until after the funeral to tell me you were taking everything. The house, the company, even Tristan's personal belongings. You ruled my house without asking my opinion, planned to move me to Chester like I was some kind of burden to be rid of. You talked about me to Peyton like I was a helpless old woman who couldn't make decisions. I turned to him. Hubert was staring at the floor, not trying to object. It's not even about how you behaved after your father died, I continued. It's how you've treated me all these years, condescending, dismissive, like a second-class citizen who only exists to cook dinners and give Christmas presents. Mom, Let me finish, I interrupted him. When I discovered your father's double life, I could have made a scandal, divorced him, ruined his reputation. But I chose a different path. I protected my interests, but I did it quietly without making a public scene. I respected what he had built, even if I didn't respect him for his deception. I walked over to the table and poured myself some wine. When I got control of the company, I could have fired you on day one. But I gave you a chance. You chose the path of confrontation. And now, when you've lost every battle, when your own business is on the verge of collapse, you come to me apologizing and asking for a job. Hubert looked up at me. There was a mixture of shame and hope in them. I'm truly sorry, Mother. I was wrong. And I really want to make it right. I sipped my wine, thinking about the situation. Part of me wanted to believe him, to give him a second chance. After all, he's my only son. But the other part, The more rational part reminded me of his past actions, of his temper, of how easily he'd gone from one extreme to the other. No, Hubert, I said at last. I can't give you a position in the company. Not now, perhaps not ever. Too much water has passed, too many bridges burned. His face contorted as if he'd been slapped. But I'm your son, your only child. Can't you forgive me for my mistakes? It's not about forgiveness. I shook my head. I forgave you a long time ago. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or letting it hurt again. The company's on the upswing. We have a solid team, a clear vision for the future. Your arrival could upset that balance. I'll work on a shared basis, Hubert insisted. No privileges, no special treatment. We both know that's not possible, I objected gently. You're the son of the founder of the company, a former heir. No matter how hard you try to be a regular employee, people will always see you as more than that. It will create unnecessary tension in the team. Hubert stood up, his hands clenched into fists. So you're just throwing me out on the street? After all I've done for the company? You were fairly compensated for your share of the stock, I reminded him. More than fair. What you do with that money is up to you. You can save your investment firm or start something new. But there's no place for you at Homewood Construction. He looked at me in disbelief, as if he couldn't realize that I was actually saying no to him. You can't do this. I'm your son. That's why I'm doing this, I said firmly. Because you're my son and I know you better than anyone. I know your strengths and your weaknesses, and I know that working for the company won't make you happy. You'll always feel you deserve more, that you've been unjustly disinherited. It will poison both your life and ours. Hubert grabbed his jacket, which he threw on the back of the chair. You'll regret this, he hissed. You'll come back to me for help when you realize you can't run the company. I held his gaze. I'm doing quite well, Hubert, and I will continue to do so. And if I need help, I have a team of professionals I trust. He turned and headed for the exit. When he turned around, I saw pain and disappointment in his eyes, not anger. I didn't expect you to be so cruelty, he said quietly. It's not cruelty, Hubert, I replied. It's justice. And if you ever learn the difference, maybe we can have a relationship. Not as business partners, but as mother and son. But he wasn't listening. The front door slammed, then his car engine roared, and soon the sound faded into the distance. I was left alone in the living room with a glass of wine in my hand and a strange sense of release or loss. Another week passed. Hubert never showed up or called again. I had heard from mutual friends that he had sold his house in Bedford and moved to Toronto, determined to make a fresh start. Perhaps it was for the best, for him and for me. At the end of August, I decided it was time to fulfill a long-held dream of traveling in Europe. Tristan had always found reasons to postpone such a trip. Company business, the wrong season, or some urgent project. Now I was free to decide for myself. I made an itinerary: London, Paris, Rome, Florence, Venice, Barcelona. 6 weeks of the trip I dreamed of since my youth. Patrick assured me that the company would get along just fine without me, and if necessary, we could always communicate by video conference. The night before I left, I stopped by the cemetery to visit Tristan's grave. I placed a bouquet of white lilies, his favorite flowers. I did it, Tristan, I said quietly. Protected the company you spent a lifetime building. Maybe not the way you planned, but the results are good. Stocks are up, customers are happy, employees feel stable. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, creating the illusion of an answer. I don't know if you wanted me to know about your second family, I continued. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe a part of you wanted the truth to come out. Either way, it changed everything. Made me wake up from the long sleep I'd been in all these years. I paused, looking at the granite headstone with the simple inscription, Tristan Holmwood, loving husband and father. I don't hate you, I said finally. But I don't miss you. It's weird, isn't it? 40 years together and now I feel liberation. Like I'd been living someone else's life all these years and now I could finally be me. I fixed the flowers and straightened up. Goodbye, Tristan. I hope wherever you are, you found peace. The next morning, I got into a cab headed for the airport. The driver helped me load my suitcases into the trunk and asked where I was going. Europe, I replied with a smile. Fulfilling a long-time dream. Alone? He wondered. Yes, I nodded. And you know what? I love it. For the first time in my life, I'm in complete control of my time, my decisions, my path. It's intoxicating feeling. The driver smiled back and started the engine. The car started, taking me away from the house where I had lived for 40 years. A home that was really mine now, not as Tristan Holmwood's wife, but as Beryl, a woman who had finally learned to live her own life. Europe was ahead of me, new impressions, new acquaintances, and then back to the company I had suddenly fallen in love with, to a new life, which was just beginning, despite my 65 years. And this thought filled me with joyful anticipation and confidence that the best was yet to come.